"Officer, are you absolutely sure you want to do this?" The question floated into the cool night air with a calmness so unexpected that even the flashing patrol lights seemed to hesitate for a heartbeat. Rain tapped softly against the windshield of the dark gray SUV as red and blue reflections rippled across the wet pavement like restless waves. Marcus Brooks tightened both hands around the steering wheel, his pulse quickening even though he had done everything by the book. 10 miles per hour under the speed limit. Turn signal at every intersection. Registration current. Insurance card tucked neatly inside the center console. Yet 2 police cruisers had appeared behind them less than a mile after they left the hospital, their lights igniting the quiet suburban road without warning. Marcus slowly lowered his driver's side window, letting the damp evening air drift inside. "Good evening, officer," he said with the practiced politeness he had learned over a lifetime. The white officer standing outside barely acknowledged the greeting. Officer Ethan Walker swept a flashlight across the dashboard, then lingered far longer than necessary on Marcus and the woman sitting beside him. His expression remained unreadable, but his narrowed eyes suggested he had already reached a conclusion before asking a single question. Danielle Brooks sat with remarkable composure in the passenger seat, one hand resting lightly on her purse while the other remained folded in her lap. She wore a simple navy sweater beneath a light rain jacket, looking no different from any woman returning home after visiting family. A paper wristband from the hospital still circled her left arm, damp from the evening mist. She quietly watched every movement outside the vehicle without interrupting. "License and registration," Walker said flatly. Marcus nodded immediately, moving carefully, making sure every motion was slow and visible. He had repeated this routine before, always believing that courtesy reduced tension. "We were just leaving Mercy Regional," Marcus explained gently. "My mother-in-law had a procedure this afternoon." Walker ignored the explanation. His flashlight traced across the leather seats, the navigation screen, the rear cargo area, and finally stopped on Danielle. "Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them." Danielle raised both hands slightly, her voice steady and respectful. "Of course, officer." The silence that followed felt heavier than the rain itself. A second patrol car rolled to a stop behind the first. Another officer stepped out, adjusting his duty belt before taking position several feet away. Officer Ryan Collins looked younger, less certain, his eyes shifting between his partner and the couple as though trying to understand why routine traffic enforcement suddenly required backup. Walker leaned closer to the open window. "Where are you coming from?" "Mercy Regional Hospital," Marcus repeated. "My wife's mother had surgery." Walker glanced briefly toward the hospital wristband but showed no sign of accepting the answer. Instead, his attention settled on the SUV once again. It was clean, well-maintained, and expensive enough to draw attention, though hardly unusual in the neighborhood. Still, something about it seemed to reinforce whatever suspicion had already formed in his mind. "Is this your vehicle?" he asked. Marcus answered without hesitation. "Yes, sir. It's registered in both our names." Walker studied him for another long second. Rainwater dripped steadily from the brim of his patrol cap, disappearing into the darkness below. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus blinked once. "Officer, may I ask why?" Walker's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm giving you a lawful instruction." Marcus slowly exhaled. Across the center console, Danielle rested her fingertips lightly against his wrist, a silent reminder to remain calm. She still had not argued, had not challenged anyone, had not even asked why they had been stopped. Instead, her eyes drifted almost casually toward Walker's uniform. His nameplate. Badge number. Body camera. Then to the dashboard camera inside the cruiser parked ahead. Then to the second cruiser arriving behind them. Every detail seemed to settle quietly into her memory. Officer Collins noticed the subtle movement and frowned slightly, puzzled by the woman's extraordinary calm. Most people became visibly anxious during encounters like this. Danielle appeared almost observant. Walker took another deliberate step toward the driver's door. "Sir," he said, his voice firmer now, "I asked you to exit the vehicle." Marcus nodded slowly and reached for the door handle. Before he could open it, Danielle finally spoke, her tone remaining warm, measured, and almost impossibly composed. "Officer," she said softly, meeting Walker's eyes for the very first time, "are you absolutely sure you want to continue this exactly the way you're doing it?" Marcus slowly pushed the driver's door open and stepped into the drizzle, careful to keep both hands visible exactly where Officer Walker could see them. Water splashed beneath his polished brown shoes as the cool wind carried the scent of wet asphalt across the nearly empty road. He glanced back once through the open door. Danielle offered the same reassuring smile she had given him countless times during difficult moments over the 12 years they had been married. It was never forced. It never looked nervous. It simply reminded him to breathe. That quiet confidence had carried them through job changes, family illnesses, and long nights sitting beside hospital beds. Earlier that evening they had spent almost 6 hours at Mercy Regional Hospital after Danielle's mother successfully completed heart surgery. The doctors had finally delivered the words everyone had been waiting to hear. She was stable. She would recover. Marcus still remembered the relief that filled the waiting room as Danielle hugged her younger sister before promising they would return first thing in the morning. They had stopped at the hospital cafeteria afterward, sharing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold while talking about ordinary things again. Marcus joked about his students preparing for final exams, and Danielle laughed softly when he admitted that 8th graders somehow found creative ways to lose homework every semester. She rarely spoke about her own career. Whenever friends asked what she did, she usually answered with a simple smile and said she worked for the federal government. Marcus had learned years ago not to press for details. It was never about secrecy between husband and wife. It was simply the nature of responsibilities that required discretion. What he admired most was that no matter how demanding her schedule became, Danielle never carried herself like someone important. She held doors open for strangers, remembered the names of grocery store cashiers, and always thanked nurses before leaving a hospital room. Watching her treat everyone with the same quiet respect had taught Marcus more about character than any book he had ever assigned in his classroom. Now, standing beneath flashing patrol lights, he searched for that same calm inside himself. Officer Walker circled slowly around the front of the sport utility vehicle, studying it from bumper to bumper without saying another word. Officer Collins remained several feet behind, occasionally shifting his weight as though increasingly uncomfortable with the silence. Danielle stayed seated exactly as instructed. Her posture never changed. Her breathing remained slow and even. She briefly glanced toward the digital clock glowing on the dashboard before letting her eyes move almost casually across the interior mirror. Reflected in the glass, she could see the position of both patrol cars, the angle of the headlights, and the steady blinking light on Walker's body camera. She quietly noticed that Collins had activated his own camera as well. Neither observation showed on her face. To anyone watching, she appeared to be nothing more than a patient woman waiting for an unpleasant traffic stop to end. Walker finally stopped beside Marcus and folded his arms. His flashlight rested against one shoulder, casting a pale beam across the rain-soaked pavement. He looked directly at Marcus before speaking in a measured voice that carried an unmistakable edge of suspicion. "Tell me again," he said, "how 2 public employees ended up driving a vehicle like this tonight." Marcus answered without hesitation. "I teach history at Lincoln Middle School, officer. My wife works for the federal government. We bought this vehicle 3 years ago." His voice remained calm, steady enough that his students would have recognized the same patient tone he used when explaining difficult lessons. Officer Walker showed no sign that the explanation mattered. Instead, he slowly walked around the sport utility vehicle once more, dragging the narrow beam of his flashlight across the wheels, the rear bumper, and the license plate before stopping beside the passenger door. Rainwater trickled from the edge of his jacket as he peered through the window toward Danielle. She met his gaze politely, then looked away without a trace of defiance. Walker tapped lightly on the glass. "Ma'am, I would like you to step out of the vehicle as well." Danielle nodded once. "Certainly, officer." She opened the door carefully, stepped onto the wet pavement, and closed it gently behind her. The hospital wristband remained visible beneath the sleeve of her rain jacket, and a faint scent of antiseptic still lingered from the hours they had spent inside the medical center. She folded her hands comfortably in front of her, neither defensive nor submissive, simply waiting. Officer Collins watched the exchange with growing uncertainty. This was no longer unfolding like an ordinary traffic stop. The couple had answered every question respectfully. They had followed every instruction immediately. Even the tension in the air seemed strangely one-sided. Walker studied Danielle for several long seconds before speaking again. "Where exactly do you work for the federal government?" Danielle smiled politely. "Administrative work." The answer was technically true, but intentionally brief. Walker frowned. "Administrative where?" Danielle maintained the same composed expression. "In Washington." Walker let out a quiet breath through his nose, clearly dissatisfied. "That is not much of an answer." "It is the answer I am able to provide," Danielle replied gently. The words were respectful, but they carried an unmistakable confidence that caused Collins to glance toward his partner. Walker took another slow step closer. "Do you have identification besides your driver's license?" "Yes, officer." "I would like to see it." Danielle rested one hand lightly on her purse but did not open it. Instead, she asked the question in the same calm tone she had used from the beginning. "May I reach into my bag?" Walker nodded sharply. Slowly. "Of course." Danielle unzipped the purse with deliberate movements, careful to keep it angled where both officers could clearly see inside. Rather than searching immediately, her eyes briefly swept across the scene one more time. She noticed the blinking indicator on Walker's body camera. Active. Collins' camera. Active. The dashboard camera inside the lead cruiser. Recording. Streetlights reflected across the rain-soaked pavement, making every movement easy to capture. She quietly closed the zipper again without removing anything. Walker's eyebrows narrowed. "Why did you stop?" Danielle answered with complete sincerity. "Because I wanted to make certain every camera was recording before we continued." For the first time that night, Officer Collins looked directly at his partner instead of the couple. Walker remained silent, but something subtle shifted behind his expression. The confidence that had driven every question since the stop began was interrupted by a single unexpected thought. Danielle had not sounded frightened. She had sounded prepared. Officer Walker held Danielle's gaze for several long seconds, as though trying to decide whether her words were confidence, caution, or quiet defiance. The rain continued to fall in a steady rhythm, tapping against the roofs of the patrol cars and washing thin streams of water toward the storm drains along the curb. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train sounded its horn before fading into the darkness, leaving only the soft hiss of passing tires on the highway several blocks away. Walker finally spoke. "You seem unusually concerned about cameras." Danielle answered without hesitation. "Transparency protects everyone, officer. You, my husband, and me." Her voice never rose above a conversational tone. Marcus looked toward her for a brief moment, surprised by how naturally she handled the growing tension. He had always known Danielle possessed remarkable composure, but tonight there was something different. She was not merely remaining calm. She was carefully guiding the conversation without appearing to do so. Walker extended one hand. "I still need to see what is inside your purse." "Certainly," Danielle replied. "Thank you for clarifying your request." She slowly unzipped the purse once more, folding the opening wide enough that both officers could clearly see inside. A wallet. A notebook. Reading glasses. A packet of tissues from the hospital. A small bottle of hand sanitizer. Nothing appeared unusual. Walker leaned slightly closer, scanning the contents with narrowed eyes. Danielle waited patiently without making a single unnecessary movement. Collins quietly observed the exchange, noticing details that had escaped him earlier. Every answer Danielle gave was respectful. Every movement followed procedure. Every request from the officers was acknowledged before she acted. It was almost as though she had practiced these encounters many times before. Walker gestured toward the wallet. "Please remove your identification." Danielle nodded. "I will." She carefully lifted the leather wallet with 2 fingers and held it where both officers could see it before bringing it closer to her chest. Instead of opening it immediately, she looked at Walker with the same calm expression. "Before I do, may I ask one question?" Walker crossed his arms. "Go ahead. Am I being detained, or am I free to leave after this traffic stop is complete?" Collins shifted slightly. It was a simple question, but an important one. Walker answered after a brief pause. "That depends on what we find." Danielle inclined her head politely. "I understand." She opened the wallet slowly. Marcus watched from several feet away, sensing that the entire atmosphere had changed. The flashing lights no longer felt like symbols of authority alone. They now illuminated every word, every decision, every choice made by everyone standing on that rain-soaked shoulder. Walker's eyes remained fixed on the wallet, expecting nothing more than an ordinary driver's license. Danielle carefully moved one card aside, then another, never rushing, never hesitating. Collins suddenly realized that his own heartbeat had become unusually loud in the quiet night. Walker leaned forward another inch. The flashlight reflected softly against polished black leather as Danielle rested one fingertip beneath a hidden card secured inside a transparent sleeve. She did not remove it. Instead, she looked directly at Walker one final time and spoke with unmistakable courtesy. "Officer Walker, before I take this out, I would like to give you one final opportunity to reconsider everything that has happened during the last 10 minutes. Officer Walker let out a short, restrained laugh that carried no warmth. The sound disappeared beneath the steady rain, but the confidence behind it lingered. "I do not need to reconsider anything," he replied. "If you have identification, then show it." Danielle gave a small nod, as though she had expected that answer all along. "Very well, officer." Marcus remained silent. His eyes moved from his wife to the 2 patrol cars, then back again. Every instinct told him something important was about to happen, yet Danielle's remarkable composure kept him from interrupting. She had always believed that the truth carried its own weight if given enough time. Danielle carefully slid one card halfway from the transparent sleeve inside the wallet. It was not immediately visible from where Walker stood. He extended his hand impatiently. "Bring it a little closer." She did exactly as instructed. The polished surface caught the reflection of the flashing emergency lights before the lettering slowly came into focus. Collins instinctively leaned forward, trying to read it from several feet away. Walker reached toward the card, then stopped. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The confidence that had filled his face moments earlier gave way to uncertainty. Danielle calmly removed the credential completely and held it at chest level, making no dramatic gesture and offering no triumphant smile. "Special Agent Danielle Brooks," she said evenly. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." The words settled into the rainy silence with surprising gentleness. No one spoke. The rhythmic clicking of cooling engines and the soft tapping of raindrops against metal suddenly seemed louder than anything else on the roadside. Collins blinked twice before looking from the credential to Danielle's face and back again. His posture changed immediately. He straightened almost instinctively, as though years of training had taken over before conscious thought could catch up. Walker remained motionless. His flashlight slowly lowered until its beam rested harmlessly on the pavement instead of Danielle's face. Marcus stared at his wife, stunned. During their marriage he had understood that her work required confidentiality, but he had never imagined the full extent of it. Danielle had never hidden the truth from him. She had simply protected information that was never hers to share. Looking at him briefly, she offered the same reassuring smile she had given him outside the hospital only hours earlier. Nothing about her expression suggested victory. If anything, she looked quietly disappointed that the evening had reached this point. Walker finally cleared his throat. "Why did you not identify yourself immediately?" Danielle answered without hesitation. "Because my profession should never determine whether I receive courtesy, fairness, or respect during a routine encounter." Collins lowered his eyes for a moment. The sentence landed harder than any accusation could have. Danielle continued in the same measured tone. "Every person deserves professionalism before anyone knows what title they hold, where they work, or what badge they carry." Walker looked toward the flashing patrol lights reflected across the wet highway, then back at the credentials still resting calmly in Danielle's hand. For the first time that evening, he appeared to realize that every question, every assumption, and every decision had unfolded exactly as multiple cameras continued recording in complete silence. The rain softened into a fine mist, drifting through the glow of the patrol lights until the entire roadside seemed wrapped in a quiet gray veil. No one moved for several seconds. Danielle lowered the credential only after Officer Walker had clearly seen every line printed across it, then carefully placed it back inside her wallet instead of holding it up as though it were a weapon. She closed the wallet with the same measured movement she had used from the beginning of the encounter. Marcus watched in silence, still absorbing the realization that the woman he loved had carried responsibilities far greater than he had ever imagined, yet had never allowed those responsibilities to change the kindness with which she treated everyone around her. Officer Collins was the first to speak. His voice sounded noticeably different now, quieter and more deliberate. "Special Agent Brooks, I was not aware." Danielle met his eyes with a gentle nod. "You were not expected to be." Collins glanced toward Walker, then toward the dashboard camera inside the lead cruiser. Every second of the stop had been preserved exactly as it happened. There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, only choices made one after another beneath the steady rhythm of falling rain. Walker remained unusually still. His shoulders had lost the rigid confidence they carried earlier. He looked down briefly before lifting his eyes again. "Why did you never mention who you were?" he asked, the question carrying less authority than genuine confusion. Danielle answered almost immediately. "Because tonight was never supposed to be about me." She looked toward Marcus for a moment before continuing. "My husband should receive the same professionalism whether he is standing beside a teacher, a nurse, a mechanic, or a federal agent. If respect only appears after someone recognizes a title, then it was never really respect." Collins quietly exhaled. Those words lingered in the cool air longer than the flashing lights reflected across the wet pavement. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, not from fear but from pride. He suddenly remembered dozens of small moments over the years. Danielle insisting on waiting patiently in long lines without mentioning her position. Danielle thanking restaurant servers by name. Danielle reminding neighborhood children to treat crossing guards with kindness every morning. None of it had been accidental. It was simply who she was. Walker removed his patrol cap for a moment, brushing away the rain gathering along its brim. His expression no longer reflected suspicion. Instead, it carried the unmistakable weight of self-examination. He slowly looked around the quiet roadway as if seeing the entire scene differently for the first time. The empty shoulder. The hospital wristband still resting around Danielle's wrist. The couple who had spent the evening worried about a recovering family member before finding themselves standing beneath emergency lights. He realized how ordinary the night had been until he transformed it into something else. Danielle never interrupted his silence. She understood that some lessons arrived only after words had finished. The rain continued to fall gently as the four people stood beneath the glow of red and blue reflections, and for the first time since the stop began, the silence no longer felt tense. It felt honest. Walker finally lifted his eyes and spoke with a calmness that had been missing all evening. "I think there are some things we need to discuss before anyone leaves tonight." Danielle looked at Officer Walker for a long moment before answering. Her expression remained calm, but there was unmistakable sincerity behind her eyes. "I am willing to have that conversation," she said softly, "because conversations are how trust begins again." Walker nodded almost imperceptibly. The defensive posture he had carried since the stop began had disappeared. His flashlight remained pointed toward the ground, forgotten beside his leg. Officer Collins quietly stepped back, giving both of them a little more space while keeping the body cameras recording exactly as procedure required. Danielle glanced toward the blinking camera mounted on Walker's uniform. "Please leave every recording exactly as it is," she said. "Do not turn anything off. Do not delete anything. The complete record matters." Walker looked surprised. "You want everything preserved?" Danielle answered with a gentle smile. "Absolutely. Complete transparency protects everyone involved. It protects citizens when officers make mistakes, and it protects officers when they do the right thing. The truth does not need editing." Collins slowly nodded. "That is fair." Danielle continued, her voice measured and thoughtful. "Many people believe that someone in my position would immediately demand names, threaten careers, or use authority to make an example out of someone. That has never been how I believe justice should work." Marcus listened quietly, hearing words that reflected the woman he had known throughout their marriage. Danielle never measured people by titles. She measured them by the choices they made after recognizing a mistake. Walker took a slow breath. "I made assumptions tonight." Danielle did not interrupt him. "I looked at your vehicle, I looked at both of you, and I convinced myself that something did not add up before I had gathered the facts. That was my responsibility, and I did not handle it the way I should have." The admission settled into the cool evening air with surprising honesty. Collins lowered his eyes briefly, recognizing how difficult it could be for anyone wearing a badge to acknowledge an error aloud. Danielle folded her hands comfortably in front of her. "Acknowledging a mistake is not weakness, officer. Refusing to learn from it is." Walker looked directly at her. "Are you investigating me?" Danielle answered without hesitation. "No." He seemed almost confused. "Then why stay so calm?" She looked toward Marcus before speaking again. "Because if I had introduced myself as a federal agent during the first minute, we never would have discovered what happened during the next 15. You would have treated my title differently than you treated two ordinary people driving home from the hospital. That difference is exactly what concerns me." Collins quietly absorbed every word. The lesson was becoming impossible to ignore. Danielle continued, "Tonight was never a test designed for you. It simply became an opportunity to see whether respect arrived before recognition or only after it." Walker remained silent for several seconds. Rain continued falling lightly across the empty roadway as the flashing lights reflected like ribbons across the wet pavement. Finally he spoke in a voice that carried none of the certainty from earlier that evening. "Special Agent Brooks, I believe I understand what you are trying to show me now." Danielle gave a small nod. "Understanding is only the first step, officer. What matters next is what you choose to do after tonight is over." Officer Walker stood quietly beneath the fading rain, allowing several long seconds to pass before speaking again. The urgency that had driven every decision earlier in the evening had disappeared, replaced by a thoughtful stillness that seemed almost unfamiliar to him. He looked first at Marcus, then at Danielle. "I owe both of you an apology," he said sincerely. "Not because of your credentials, but because I should have shown the same professionalism before I knew anything about either of you." Marcus nodded gently. Thank you for saying that. His voice carried no bitterness. Only relief. Danielle smiled softly. Apologies matter when they are followed by action. Walker accepted the words with a slow nod. They will be. Officer Collins stepped forward slightly. I would like to add something as well. Danielle turned toward him. Collins continued, I spent most of tonight watching procedures unfold exactly as they were recorded. Looking back, I realized there were several moments when I could have asked more questions instead of simply following along. I intend to remember that. Danielle's expression warmed. Good officers hold each other accountable. That protects the public, and it protects the profession. Collins quietly thanked her. The conversation no longer sounded like a traffic stop. It sounded like four people trying to leave a difficult moment better than they had entered it. Walker reached toward the radio attached to his shoulder, then stopped. Instead of making a transmission, he lowered his hand again. There is no reason to continue this stop, he said. Your documents are valid. Your vehicle is properly registered. You are free to leave whenever you are ready. Danielle nodded appreciatively. Thank you. Walker hesitated before speaking again. Special Agent Brooks, are you planning to file a complaint? Marcus glanced toward Danielle, wondering how she would answer. She remained silent for a moment, watching raindrops gather along the edge of the patrol car before sliding quietly onto the pavement below. Finally, she looked back at Walker. What happens next depends less on tonight and more on tomorrow. Walker listened carefully. Tomorrow you will decide whether this was simply an uncomfortable evening or the beginning of becoming the officer you intended to be when you first accepted your badge. Every shift after tonight is another opportunity to prove that people deserve fairness before assumptions. Walker slowly lowered his head. I understand. Danielle continued gently. I have spent my career believing that accountability is not about humiliation. It is about improvement. If someone learns, changes, and treats the next family with greater dignity than the last, then something meaningful has been accomplished. Marcus felt a quiet sense of admiration as he watched his wife. She had every opportunity to emphasize authority, yet she continued choosing compassion. Walker extended his hand toward Marcus first. I am sorry for making your drive home harder than it should have been. Marcus accepted the handshake warmly. I appreciate that, officer. Walker then looked toward Danielle. She shook his hand with the same calm professionalism she had shown throughout the evening. No triumph. No resentment. Just quiet respect. As their hands parted, the flashing emergency lights reflected across the wet roadway one final time, and in that silent moment it became clear that the most important thing revealed that night had never been a federal credential. It had been the character each person chose to carry when no one could change what had already happened, only what would happen next. 3 months passed, and the memory of that rainy evening never completely disappeared, although its meaning slowly changed for everyone involved. Autumn gave way to the first cool mornings of winter, and Marcus returned to his classroom each day with the same quiet enthusiasm that had made generations of students look forward to history lessons. Danielle continued leaving home before sunrise more often than not, carrying the same simple leather bag and offering the same warm smile to neighbors who still believed she worked somewhere in a government office. She never corrected them. She had never needed recognition to find purpose. One Saturday morning, as golden sunlight spilled across the front porch of their home, Marcus stepped outside to collect the mail. Resting among utility bills and holiday advertisements was a neatly addressed envelope from the local police department. He carried it inside without saying a word. Danielle looked up from her cup of coffee as he placed the envelope on the kitchen table. She opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter signed by Officer Ethan Walker. The words were simple, without excuses or elaborate explanations. He wrote that he had requested additional training in procedural fairness and community engagement. He had volunteered to mentor new officers about slowing down before making assumptions and had asked that the recording from that evening be included as part of an internal training discussion, not to embarrass anyone, but to remind others how easily ordinary moments could be shaped by quiet bias or careful professionalism. At the end of the letter, one sentence stood apart from the rest. "Thank you for allowing me to learn instead of simply allowing me to fail." Danielle folded the letter carefully and smiled. Marcus looked at her. "Are you going to answer him?" She nodded. "Yes." She took out a plain sheet of stationery and began writing. Her reply was even shorter. "Real integrity is not measured by whether we make mistakes. It is measured by what we choose to become after we recognize them." She signed only her name. Nothing more. Several weeks later, Marcus attended a community education event at the local civic center with several of his students. Across the room he noticed Officer Collins speaking with a group of teenagers about respectful communication between officers and citizens. Collins recognized Marcus almost immediately and walked over with a genuine smile. "I wanted you to know something," he said quietly. That night changed more than one person. Marcus shook his hand warmly. "I am glad to hear that." As Marcus walked away, he glanced toward the front entrance where Danielle stood waiting beside the afternoon sunlight streaming through the glass doors. She looked exactly as she had on the night they left the hospital, calm, kind, and quietly strong. Marcus reached for her hand, and together they stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. Behind them, conversations continued inside the building. Ahead of them, children laughed in a nearby park while golden leaves drifted gently across the sidewalk. Danielle slipped her federal credential back into her wallet before placing it inside her purse, hidden once again from the world. She did not need a badge to define her character, and she never had. As they walked toward their car, their shadows stretched side by side beneath the warm light, and the quiet truth that remained after everything else had faded was beautifully simple. Respect means the most when it is offered before anyone knows who is standing in front of them.